thank you for accepting my invitation to come onto my podcast and do this video with me. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it a lot too.
You're welcome.
Feel like you're a kindred soul possibly here.
We're kind of basing our conversation on a book that you've written called Reaching Heaven on Earth. And is there a subtitle?
Yeah, A Soul's Journey Home.
A Soul's Journey Home.
Yes. So basically saying that that's where we're all destined while we're alive here on Earth. But depending upon where we are in our stage, it doesn't mean we'll get there in this lifetime. But that ultimately is the predetermined objective of where evolution is taking us. And that's the heart of Gopi Krishna's theory. So I'm just a big believer in what he put forward. He died in 1984, but everything he said from back at that time is just as applicable today, even more applicable, I would say. And just one other thing I'll say is that he said the fatal gap in our knowledge was that we didn't understand the evolutionary target for humankind, and that's is really why we have this present highly explosive situation in the modern world, and that was back in 1984, and I think it's even more so. So just a believer in him, and I had a lot of the, just the same experiences and deep knowings. And so like whenever I get on these things, I'm really new to this. I think this is my 4th time I've done this, and I'm trying to maybe do it a little bit more, not because I really like to do it, I'll be honest with you. I normally get kind of amped up. But I feel like his thing is so important that I need to at least put out my part of it. And when I put stuff out there, it comes out of my experiences and my knowing, and I'm not trying to teach anybody anything. I'm just sharing, And if something helps somebody, then fine. But it's not like trying to get an argument to prove a theory or any of that kind of thing. So
yeah, I really understand that. Something you said in your interview on Bat Gap with Rick Archer, not an exact quote, but you were saying the importance of sharing our stories.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And it's so important. And that's kind of what I attempt to do and what I share. And I very much am not in that lane of wanting to be a teacher of any kind, because it does seem like there's a temptation for people to kind of give their power to another person. And of course, we know the power is within.
Yeah. I kind of made a determination. I actually, when I left the business world, I got trained as a spiritual director, and it was actually in the Catholic Church, but with an ecumenical program. And I did actually only about 1.5 years of the training. And then I said, you know what? I'm just not comfortable being a director because that puts me above somebody. Not that I think it's wrong. I think it's a really good service to people. And that was back in 1998. And that's when I stumbled into a 12-step program. I just felt like that is my home. There's equality here. And every person's story is very important. It doesn't matter where people are in the cycle, everywhere. I always feel like where people are at is where they're supposed to be. And if somebody's maybe a little bit further along, so in terms of, a spiritual disposition, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean they're better, that kind of thing. It's just they're at a different cycle, they're a part of the cycle. So
yeah, definitely. And you mentioned the 12-step program, which I'm familiar with, and those steps are, a lot of times I think when people get on the spiritual path, and I don't know this for sure because I only know my own experience. I don't know everybody in the world, but it seems like when people get on the spiritual path, they want to possibly bypass the psychological self or the conditioned self and kind of step over that and get to what they might consider to be the good stuff. But I don't know, unless you have a spontaneous awakening, that you can get to the good stuff without doing the work. What do you think?
No, I agree 100%. I always looked at it like, And I had, before I got into the 12 steps, and probably like you know, been on a journey since age basically 22 when I had anxiety. I won't get much into my story. If people want to hear more of my story, they can get the book or go to the Batgap or the Gas Pump interview. But, you know, I talked about how I had a lot of anxiety early on, and my mind would race out of control when I was a teenager. And sometimes when I went to bed, I was afraid that I couldn't breathe, and just had a lot of things, you know, a little afraid that I had some illness. And so that led me into to see a psychologist finally for anxiety. And then you know, he wanted to give me Valium, and I said, well, no, you know, I took one or two and I stopped. I have to do this without drug. I know I'm on a long journey here. I just kind of intuitively knew it. I knew it would be about love, but a big part of it was healing and recovery. So I went from there to, you know, like probably I went into counseling, read a lot of psychological books, and just kept progressing from, you know, Freud to Jung to the Christian mystics, then all mystics, the historical Jesus, all these different books, and I would be led from book to book to book. And then into spiritual direction for 5 years. And then I got to the 12 steps. And I just felt like when I walked into the room, and it was an Al-Anon program, and it just felt so powerful to me. Like I could feel the power, like I can really be obedient to this power. But the work around there is like, now getting back to the core, it's really about working on yourself. And I always call myself a inner activist rather than outer. Maybe I'll be more of an outer when I get more pure inside, but you know, but it was like, and then working the steps, becoming vulnerable, you know, getting into what, not only my, you know, things that need shortcomings, but I don't really view them as shortcomings that I have as a person, but work through those, but also my strengths, and is a place where I could tell my secrets. And it was just really healing, and it's really hard work. And so I would always look at it like, you know, meditation is fantastic, you know, so is yoga. But I honestly feel that purification is probably even more needed because we've been so materialistic for so long, and that's really, so it means cleansing ourselves. So that's been a big focus. There's a long answer to your really short question.
No, but that's so true. And the steps, you know, are set up in such a way that it's kind of incremental, depending on if you are actually doing those steps. And anybody can look up the steps online to see what they are. But the last two, building up from step 1, step 11 sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. And then step 12 is having had a spiritual awakening. So to me, the 12 steps go hand in hand with the spiritual path. I mean, it's part of it.
Well, when the first meeting I went to, which I didn't even know I was going to a 12-step meeting, you know, so it was kind of, you know, I had a friend that said, let's go to this meeting. And I said, okay, I just followed him. I didn't know what it was. I walked into the meeting. I was blown away by how honest, vulnerable, but loving and kind. And it was kind of like, take what you like. There's no shoulds. We're not going to tell you what to do. That really resonated with me. Now, the joke I used to say is step 1, I admitted I was powerless and my life was unmanageable. And I always say I then jumped to step 11 and 12 because I really actually I did 1 and 2. 2, you know, was coming to God, but then 11 and 12 was the praying and the then carrying the message. The other, and is like, you know, but it was really 3 through 10 where you really do the work on yourself and the cleansing. And so I quickly learned that I had to do those. And yeah, you're right. Everything, one step led to the next. And then after a while, the whole thing, all the steps just kind of work you, and everything just keeps unfolding. And then I say, well, you start with this linear program, but then for me, then it became more like a circle, like the steps were in a circle. And sometimes I'd be doing 12, sometimes 10, sometimes 8. So I kind of feel like that's what spirituality is like too. Sometimes you're doing meditation, some yoga, but you have a kind of, you know, a balanced program of different disciplines for me.
Yeah. There's so much that I want to cover. So I did just make some notes, and I know you probably have some notes of things that you'd like to share as well. Let's see. Well, we can start off with Kundalini or Kundalini. I'm not sure the correct pronounce. What is it, Scott? Kundalini or Kundalini?
Kundalini.
Kundalini.
But I'm no expert either on it. I'll just say that, right? You know, some people that really have studied the whole historical roots of it. I've studied it through, you know, Gopi Krishna, but just a little preface to that. I was going to give what kind of led into that. Like,
yes,
for me,
sure.
you know, I kind of I say it was a dark night of the soul period. It was in 1998 for 3 years. And up to that point, I was on this path to become, you know, my father was somebody who started in the mailroom in Oscar Mayer and rose up to be CEO. And so that was in me, like, I got to get to the top too. So I was on this path to, I always call it, to find my security and my stardom and all of this and really be a high achiever. And so it kind of led me into all these different financial areas, including investment banking. And I got a lot of education and a lot of, you know, I did entrepreneurial work. So I was on this whole path. And then I would say almost on a dime, all of a sudden, everything went to almost like zero. At the time, I was working on the 43rd floor at 101 California Street in the heart of the financial district, working with a man named Howard Leach, who was later the ambassador to France, and he was chairman of the board of the University of California, which all meant a lot to me. And it was like, all of a sudden, we tried to do one big deal, and it was almost done. I thought it would make me a millionaire. And then all of a sudden, it didn't work out. And it was almost like for the next, I would say from 1995 to 2020, everything was just really hard. And I had to totally surrender to what I call, you know, God. It's God for me. It's the inner voice. And so that led me to, instead of trying to go outside and climb the ladder anymore, I kind of went inside myself, kind of one step at a time, deeper into my own mind. Mm-hmm. And it was something that I kind of knew, like, you know, property, prestige, power, you know, the 3 Ps, I call them, worked. Mm-hmm. They weren't going to work for me anymore. And not that anything's wrong with that, but so during this dark night of the soul, you know, I got divorced. I had these investments. They almost went to zero. Had to move to an apartment. And we were responsible to all these investors, and things were going horrible, and I had to call them, and I hated it. And I would draw crosses like I'm being crucified, and then I kept getting sick. I got shingles. And so that went on for 3 years, but I really looked at it like that was my transition. It started at age 30, about 39, and it was really trying to transition me to this inner world. And because I had been working on myself since age 22, I kind of knew what was happening. Okay. And so, you know, I would always say the treasures within, you know, mm-hmm. divinities within, the splendors within, and I was going to be reliant on this inner. So then one day I was meditating, right before that I kept having all these dreams of hurricanes and a tornado, and then a Holocaust hit the San Francisco area in a dream, and I'm just like, there's something coming, and it doesn't feel good, but I don't know what it is. And then I was meditating one day, and this just energy, you know, there was a crackling at my spine region. Okay. And I didn't meditate a lot either. I did a little here and there, but I heard this crackling at my spine, down at my base of the spine. And it just sounded like bubbles popping or Rice Krispies when you pour milk on it. And I was like, God, this sounds really weird. And then all of a sudden I heard this snap, this current went up, my electric current seemed to go right up into my head. I saw these bright lights, and simultaneous, I felt this suction effect coming from my reproductive area, and it was sucking, almost like a vacuum cleaner, sucking up something into my head. And it was some kind of essence, because the energy felt like, with the lights and just the intensity of it, like I had never felt energy before till this happened. Now it was like it was 50,000 volts. And I thought, I have no idea what this is, but it kind of is burning me. But then this other thing that was going simultaneously, these secretions that were being sent up, they felt like almost like white liquid milk. They were cooling me down.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a double process going on. That happened in 1997. And from that point on, this suction effect and this sucking up of reproductive secretions into my brain and this very powerful energy has never stopped. It's always been this huge force inside of me. And so then it was like, it took me 3 years before I then stumbled into Gopi. I'm sorry, and these answers are so long. There's a little bit of background to get to
sure. Sure.
So it was 3 years after this first happened. And for whatever reason, it didn't freak me out. I didn't even do that much research on it. It just felt, okay, this is part of the process. And then I talk about how right after this happened, I started having all these psychic and paranormal experiences, and somebody can look at them in my book or thing, but there were a lot of things where it said, wow, somehow I've been catapulted into a different reality where I'm having these experiences and, being normally a very grounded person and prove it to me sort of thing. I'm saying, well, how can I dream something and then it happened? How can I have these visions of Christ and Mother Mary? And how can I feel like I'm at the top, right next to the moon? And how can I feel like you're in my consciousness? I was talking to a friend one day, really good friend. I thought, boy, if I tell him right now that he's in the middle of my consciousness, he's going to just freak out and he's going to think I'm crazy. And just one other thing, and then I'll get to Gopi, but it was like also I started seeing like spirits come out of the heads of people. They were like little ghosts or apparitions, and they would go up. And I thought this is very interesting. But the very first one, I was on a very small board of directors with Ram Dass. And it had to do with strokes. And it was a friend of ours. And the first time I saw a spirit was coming out of his head. And, and I had out-of-body experiences. But so all those things I kept saying, stay grounded, though. These are just telling you something. Like, I don't believe I'm seeing Jesus or Mary. They have some meaning that they're guiding me and leading me somewhere. And it's almost like a symbolic language, like Carl Jung.
Yeah.
What does that mean? I didn't literally think any of this was really happening. And so all that was a prelude to then, I had this dream of a huge whale tail in a cave one day. And I was like, I woke up, I could barely breathe. It was so titanic. And it's hard to explain because when you just hear a whale tail in a cave, but almost like, the tornadoes and all that coming, and then the Kundalini energy rose short thereafter. It must have been a month or two later that on Christmas Eve, I went into a bookstore in Boynton Beach, Florida. I got directed. I always got directed to the next book. I don't know did that probably happen to you too? Yeah. Okay. Go in here. And it was go to this section. It wasn't that direct, but kind of go here. And there's the book. And it was Living with Kundalini, the autobiography of Gopi Krishna. And when I read that book, he just explained everything that was happening to me, like the psychic and paranormal experiences. I'll read a poetic verse later, but I started writing in poetic verse, and I wrote 48 over an 18-year time period, and they were taking me from basically a beginning where I was petrified and in fear, but connected to God, who said, take dictation. I couldn't write a single line of poetry, but all of a sudden I was just, it would just pour through me. So that was verse 1. By 47, I was like in this other world, of the soul and beauty and all of that. So, that was another thing that had happened to me. And so Gopi Krishna explained, you get new talents, you can have little mental instability, which I do. I started with anxiety, but it was almost gone. And then I had a little bit of paranoia, a little bit of, I would say, what would I call it? Yeah, maybe just anxiety, a little bit of depression, these new talents, these psychic paranormal experiences, and then even deeper experiences where I would say there were experiences of consciousness. So that was all in his book. And so he talked about his awakening and amazing, what it led him to, because he ended up writing 18 books and putting out this new theory of evolution having to do with the biological evolution of the brain. And I love that because we're like, oh my God, because I would always hear this voice, divinity is within, divinity is within. Well, now it was like, it's biological. Maybe it can be proven. Well, I think the biology of a Kundalini awakening, it's got to be able to be proven because all the biology has happened to me. And so so that's another long answer to why, it's like, he also introduced the concept of higher consciousness. And I thought, what does that mean? And it sounds kind of highfalutin and all of this, but boy, he was just on another wavelength. And so not only did he detail his experiences of what happened to him, the state of mind he got into, but he also said in the last 18 pages of the book, this is why it's so important to humanity. And I still don't think humanity has even come close. I know a lot of more people know about him now. So anyway, so I was, I found his mentor or his spiritual son, a guy named Gene Kiefer, was up in Connecticut, became very close to him. He had been studying energetic changes for 50 years, had edited some of Gopi Krishna's books. Like I said, he became my mentor. He gave me all Gopi Krishna's books. There were 18 of them. And I thought, Kundalini and Gopi Krishna, this is way out of my normal bailiwick. It's kind of like, but somehow I understand every word in them, and it's like candy to me. And I'm sure, have you had experiences like that where you're just like, and I never thought like he's a guru or a mentor, nothing like that. The reason I liked him is he was so humble. And he said, this is a scientific thing I'm putting out there. I don't want anybody, I don't want followers. I don't want anything of that. And that really resonated too to me. So
don't you think, or do you think that depending on where you are at in your own journey, wherever you're kind of your state of mind or your awareness, it is kind of like a wavelength, and we're drawn to maybe people that have come before us that are on a similar wavelength, and then they can help us. They can be a guide of sorts, even if they're not living.
Oh, I totally agree. And it's like, for me, I started with Wayne Dyer and Scott Peck and Carolyn Mace. And then, like I said, it went to Freud and then Jung. And then there was a guy named John Bradshaw who was teaching about the inner child, right? And I even found my counselor through him, because if I really liked somebody, I would find them somehow. And then it led to Carl Jung. I was really studied him and thought he was amazing. I would think the audience, a lot of people know about Carl Jung.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly who your audience is, but then it went to two Christian priests, but who had studied under Carl Jung, and they wrote like Jung, but they had a spiritual bent to them, and I really liked that. And then I met Mike Murphy, who started Esalen. I don't know if you know of Esalen. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it, but I'm not really familiar with the
2-second introduction. It basically was a human growth center, and it was Aldous Huxley said the center for realizing the capacity of the human mind. And Mike was kind of known as one of the pioneers in the human potential movement and the consciousness movement. He started Esalen with somebody named Richard Price in 1962. It was in Big Sur, California. A lot of top psychologists, a lot of people have gone out there to teach. And so he had created this amazing place. But when I met him, which I met at Pebble Beach in a golf outing, if you can believe that, where he was doing this little exercise, and then we hit it off, and he wanted to create a center for integral transformative practice, and he wanted to leave Esalen. And his idea was he wanted to create a new form of health club, that would have like a physical health club like the Bay Club, which was a big health club in San Francisco. And on top of that, he would lay his intellectual software on how to kind of grow someone's consciousness. And he had a partner named George Leonard. So he had this, if you have an idea of an integral practice of body, physical exercise, eating healthy, sleep, mind, heart, and soul. So a whole smorgasbord of practices with physical. And then the idea was Stanford Research Institute would then study people who came to the health club and got into their programs and see if they could raise their consciousness. And the idea was the blueprint for, we'll create one in San Francisco, one in maybe Germany and one in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So it would be a blueprint for a whole new thing of how to build consciousness and can we measure consciousness changes. And what happened to me is then after about 6 months, they started to find an investor. I was helping him to try to find an investor, although I understood very much what he was doing. What I learned from him was this idea of an integral practice, at which I always said, but for me, it was like from a practice of you have a container, which was the 12 steps, which you surrender to, and then the disciplines come to you over time. So you don't need somebody telling you what to do. They can give you, ideas. That's how I looked at it. And then a golf club company opportunity, which was my dream thing, came to me. And so then I left that. And he never was successful with that, but he continued the thing in other ways. So he was a mentor. And then after that, it was almost like I went to Gopi Krishna and he was just ahead. And I'm not saying better, but he was on a level that I was just amazed and I just understood him. So it was a level where I considered he was like in a way a scientist and a prophet at the same time, but humbler than the, dirt and all of that. So there's another long answer to mentors, but yes.
If you were to suggest a book of his, which book would you suggest someone turn to first?
Yeah.
Or can you, or could you?
It's so hard, but Living with Kundalini's autobiography. If you're somebody that's having like different experiences, of an energy rising and you're having, paranormal experiences. Like for me, I had other things like all of a sudden, my vision just widened. It's like the world I saw was almost like I was seeing a much wider thing. I saw lights. So in other words, when I read his book, he had all this stuff that there were experiences I was having. So if somebody is interested in, had experiences like that, because you get to hear, there's a lot of his personal story in the beginning that may or may not interest people. But if they're also interested in, I look at it this way, there's a lot of people who understand Kundalini, and there's from an Eastern perspective, there's people who understand it really deeply. I feel like he advanced it one level by saying, it's tied to a biological mechanism in the body and is leading to the evolution of the brain, which that in turn leads to psychic paranormal experiences, more talent, and eventually, 1 in a billion or 1 in 100 million, whatever it is, to an enlightened mind. So he had it all, and then he had a vision for what it meant for humanity in the future. So if that interests somebody, another book he wrote was The Biological Basis of Religion and Genius. And he sent that book in 1971 out to like 300 scientists and said, here's the biological basis of religion and science. And I don't think, or genius, religion and genius, sorry. And I don't think he got hardly any responses, even though the guy that wrote the foreword to that book was a guy named von Weizsäcker, and he was a prominent scientist in Germany, now a little bit clouded because they said maybe he was involved in the bomb making in Germany, the nuclear bomb, which I don't think was true, but he was friends with Heisenberg, so he was a deep scientist, and he wrote the foreword saying, which for him, a scientist to take that risk was incredible. And so I'm trying to think what other books. I like Higher Consciousness and Kundalini. That's another book, The Awakening of Kundalini. So what I would say is, if anybody is interested, there is a website. I call them the Canadians, who've been advancing the work of Gopi Krishna for 40 some years, I think. It's the icrcanada.com. I don't know if it needs a icrcanada.com. And it has a description of his theory and books and also like a proposed research project. And but people, my mentor and these Canadians have done incredible work, but it still really hasn't broken through. But that website would give you the books and you can kind of look at them. And so
So something you said and what you were just sharing, I have a question around. You mentioned an enlightened mind. How would you define an enlightened mind?
They call it cosmic consciousness. The reason they call it that, there was a I don't know if you've read this or heard of it. 1901, there was a book written called Cosmic Consciousness, a study in the evolution of the human mind. It was in the human mind, Richard Maurice Buck.
Right. Yep. Got it.
So that describes, which is kind of the Enlightenment, but he called it cosmic consciousness. In 1994, somehow I stumbled into a man named Robert May, and he wrote a book called Cosmic Consciousness Revisited. Okay. And then I actually tracked him down, got to know him, but the pearl that I picked out of what he said is basically in one of the beginning pages, he said, Buck's psychology was first of all, that he was a century ahead of his time, and that his psychology, that we haven't even begun to really, this was written in 1994, keep that in mind, we haven't really begun to really understand Carl Jung and his psychology, and he said, Buck's psychology is a domain deeper than Jung. Okay, that's hard for people to understand, but I completely agree with him. And then I wrote in my book how, Gopi Krishna has really advanced the work of Buck, okay, in terms of the biological basis and all of that. The way I try to do things is, I'm not saying I'm enlightened or cosmic conscious or anything, but what I try to show in my book is, I feel like the whole domain of what is an enlightened mind, what are psychic paranormal experiences, is very unclear. There's all these different experiences people are having, but there's no kind of putting it all together.
Connecting.
You know what I mean by that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So in my own experience, I can see where, I started with anxiety, and then in the 1991 through 1994 period, I started having these experiences. One was of a very bright light. I was like, wow, what was that? Another was where one day I just felt this incredible peace inside and this calming presence. And I actually went back to church, and I was in the middle of just starting my business career then. I said, whatever this is I'm so peaceful. And then I had the next, this all happened within a year or two time period, but then from there it went to, like Gandhi and character development and truth and honesty. And that's just so important. I read Gandhi, that book 8 times. And it was like, so it was like character development. And then it was like nature was so beautiful. And then I started getting all different ideas. So there was an intellectual expansion. So that was the first, wow, what were all these things that happened to me? And even in 1991, that's when I started writing poetry. That's when I had a connection to this inner voice. And this inner voice even said to me, you are meant to bring a new consciousness into the world. And I thought, oh my God, if I tell anybody that, they're going to think like I'm an egotistical maniac. I was working on the 43rd floor at 101 California. I didn't know what consciousness was. I thought, well, maybe that's true, probably not. But I always stay grounded. I didn't take anything to it, but here I am kind of doing that. And it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to make my life about it. It just happened. So then what happened was I went and told you earlier, like 6 years later, this stronger awakening where the energy now was it shot up my spine, and I could feel this biological process that's never stopped. That led to psychic paranormal experiences. So it's almost like I had those initial experiences, and what I always looked at it was they were preparing me for something, saying your mind is more than you think. But if it came all at once, you'd freak out. Okay, so then there was another set of them, psychic paranormal, which this is, a lot of people will disagree with this, but even when I had visions, I saw them as not a permanent, like they were just kind of guiding me, okay? But that when there were the deeper experience, the deeper experiences, let's say in the 2000 to 2018 time period, I have this in my book, but it's like I talk about, these were more deeper experiences than psychic and paranormal experiences, because I felt they were experiences of consciousness rather than what a normal mind shows, like that, rather than psychic and paranormal. And then I have a list of them, but basically the first one was all of a sudden I saw this love, and that everything was connected in love. Then all of a sudden I saw this one day driving. I looked up in the sky, and there was just this sheer light and a fountain of joy. They talk about Ananda, being the bliss at the core of creation. Well, that's what it was. Well, I kept seeing that in different places. These were one-time experiences, but the ecstasy kept happening. Then pretty soon it became almost like a fountain inside of me that today it has never stopped. Gopi Krishna wrote that the closer you move to the core of creation, the stronger the joy gets. Well, it's so gradual, but I can be going through hell on earth, which a lot of times I am. I still have that joy. Okay. The next one was I came out of the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C., and all of a sudden I was like, God, everything is connected. And we're all in this incredible presence, So that was the unity one. And then the final one was I had an experience of what I call consciousness. I looked up the sky. It was actually on a train platform outside Washington, D.C. It was at night. And there was this shimmering, glistening, just incredible brightness and beauty. And it was like, it just came to me, this is life without material alloy. This is our soul. And that was a one-time experience. But that to me is consciousness. So again, summarizing, 1991 period, then they got deeper in 97. And then, but what I'm saying are different about the last ones I just explained is that I feel like the cosmic conscious mind, is what, number one, we're all moving toward. It's the predetermined next destination for humankind. We're at a very early stage. So everybody's at different rungs. They may be having psychic paranormal experiences. But I feel like the last experiences are permanent. Like, in other words, the love, the ecstasy, the oneness, because eventually what happened to me, and this all sounds a little strange, and if I was hearing this out there, I would say, I don't know if I believe him, but... No,
it doesn't sound strange to me at all.
Well, that's why I was so excited to do this with you today, because I thought somehow, how you have to kind of hold back sometimes because you don't know what you can say, and if you go then people are going to go, well, he's not credible, and here I am, that's my background, but it was like the love, the ecstasy, the oneness. And so what happened to me is almost like it became inverted, where I never could understand when people said consciousness versus mind versus ego versus intellect. Like, what is, it's all confusing to me. But I look at the normal mind, I kind of have my ego, my intellect, and my self-will. Okay. But in the next step of the mind, consciousness, what happened, and it was very gradual over a long period of time, it was like the material world looks more like an image to me now on an ocean of consciousness.
I get that.
You get that? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful. Now I feel like I hear this dead silence and I go, oh, I went too far. And I'm sure the reason I put this out there, because I just think there's probably people all over the world, and I don't even know that, the people are probably already saying all this stuff, but I think a lot of people all over the world, but it's never been tied together in one tight theory, which I think Gopi Krishna does. And if science could see if they could prove the biological basis of it, he said that was absolutely necessary for humankind, because it will then see that we're all destined for the same place. Right now we're divided into races and sexes and ethnicities, social classes, and we're about ready to kill each other. But if we all realize we're going to the same place, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Arrival by chance.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Remember I don't know how to tell the story really quickly. There were 12 pods, alien pods, that came to different parts of the world, and they had a message. And of course, some of the nations interpret the message as a weapon and that they were going to blow us up or something. But the end result of it was, once we realized that every one of the 12 pods had a piece of the message, And the message was going to show humankind how to basically see into the future. And then they would need help back. So the idea was, rather than, I kind of look at the same, if the world could realize where we're going to and come together. And I know this is like a really difficult thing, that if everybody could come together, this is a unifying thing, because we're all going to this glorious place, but we don't realize it. And we're fighting over wealth and, land, and I'm right, you're wrong, So anyway, so back to the whole thing of what is cosmic consciousness. I do know I did develop new talents. I wrote 48 verses, and they start from the beginning to the end, and they really show in one lifetime how your consciousness can change, from normal to a whatever type of mind. And I'll read one at the end that you maybe suggested. So for me, it was more like, but more importantly, I'm more healthy. I feel like my mind is just much, as I get older, it's sharper than it's ever been. My intellect is, and one of the things Gopi Krishna said, he said, the importance of seeing into the future, revelation, was by, you had let's say, Buddha and his discourses, you had the Bible, you have the Quran, you have the Bhagavad Gita. The main purpose of higher consciousness is to bring new knowledge to the race about our evolutionary future. Okay. So like Christ and Buddha said, okay, here's what you have to do to reach God, but I would just interpret it now, or these are the things we need to do to reach the next level of consciousness. And in a sense, we see more of God, but there might be a lot more levels, before we even get close to, because we can't understand, first of all, how we're nothing in this world or the universe. We're just like, I won't even go into the size of the universe and all of that. But in some ways, it's the same with consciousness. We're a drop right now, and that drop of consciousness, it really evolved. I know I'm going all over the place, but let me just go to, I believe in evolution, that we went from kind of primary organisms, and then we went to primates and hominids, and then we went to humankind. We developed an intellect. Some scientists believe 20,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, it came fully formed. That led to the rise of civilization. Okay. And for the first time, we had some free choice, freedom of choice. We weren't being bound by our instinct, which is much of the natural world is. And so then we create this world of, I don't know if I'm going too fast with all this, but this world of mathematics and architecture and art and scientific discoveries and logic and language and the civilization we have today. And I know Gopi Krishna believed that, saying we're developing the next faculty of the mind beyond the intellect. Let's call it illumination or cosmic consciousness. I call it the three I's. We went from instinct bound to intellect, and now we're moving toward a whole nother faculty of the mind where we're going to begin to see what consciousness is and what our soul is.
And that I would be the
I call it illumination, but I would also say there's a path to that final I. I would call it intuition, to inspiration, to illumination.
I like that so much. Yeah.
So it's the five I's, but then I thought that was confusing to people. And
because the intuition, the inner teacher, inspiration in spirit, and then illumination. I mean, that makes total sense to me.
Okay. Well, most scientists, anybody who's had a new idea, it's really came out of nowhere, like sometimes in dreams to them, like a new scientific theory. But the illuminated mind is the most important. And I know the ancients talked about it's the wisdom that comes out of the higher conscious mind that's important. So I was talking about how the scriptures of humankind were so important. I went through, the Quran, the Bible, because they were giving guidance to the race. So they're the most important. They're more important. Let's say all are important. Don't get me wrong, but there might be more important than Einstein and scientific discoveries, because the highest ones give us guidance on where we need to go in the race. So Gopi Krishna said we're at a critical breaking point in the race right now, because we are stuck between the intellectual mind, which has becomes, not to put it down, but a little bit unbalanced, a little bit egotistical, and the new mind that's trying to emerge. Okay, so, before, if you go back in history 200 million years ago, the dinosaurs came, and so did the mammals almost at the same time. But for the next 134 million years, it's like the dinosaurs got bigger and scarier, and the mammals had to stay underground to stay safe from them. Okay, and then the asteroid hit, wiped the dinosaurs out. The mammals came to the surface, and then life took off. And if you condense it to 1 hour, we've only been here 1 second. I don't know if that was all too fast, but I'm saying that it's the same thing, that this whole new mind now is developing, and it's somewhat being blocked by some people who, oh no, this can't be true. Historically, the scholars and the intellects said there's a purpose to revelation. In other words, like intellectual development, genius, creativity are really important and have advanced the race a lot of different ways.
Yeah, right.
But we're at a point now where we don't really realize that material progress is important, but really the ultimate, it's to really help progress the spiritual development of the race. But we, in a sense, we've become like gluttons with all the material things.
Right.
And we don't realize there's this greater thing coming that's trying to break through. So
I have a question. If and when, I'll say when, we advance to the illuminated mind, cosmic consciousness, in that kind of mind versus relying on the intellect mind only, wouldn't things happen like almost instantly, like quicker? Like it wouldn't take, do you know what I'm trying to say?
yeah, I do. Well, yeah. The first thing I would say is one of the attributes of the illuminated mind is you don't have to go through the process of reasoning to get to an answer on certain things. You just, boom, it hits you.
Yeah, that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of the attributes of the intellectual, of the illuminated mind.
Yeah.
But if you go think back to, let's say when we were primates, and then we all of a sudden the ability to think and reason, the intellect and reason developed in humankind. Well, the first arrivals at that port were probably saying, Jesus, what's happening to me?
That's true. That is true. Yeah.
Yeah, in a way, it's what's happening people today, like, the founders of religions or the mystics or the yogis, who I think are the pioneers in consciousness research in some way. Now, they were a little bit distorted because they were so, they had ascetic religion, not to put for that time period, that's what they needed. But I'm just saying, but what I think's happening now, in my own view, is evolution of the brain works through concentration. And it speeds up if we, meditation speeds up, you concentrate, that speeds up brain evolution. Also, if you're studying hard, anytime you apply your mind. Now, if you look at people today, what are they doing? They're always on their phones. We're always thinking, look, we're concentrating, but we're not necessarily concentrating on all that are good things. And so in a way, rather than developing this intellect or this illuminated mind or some steps to it, I think we're having, ADHD and autism, and maybe this isn't right, okay, but I just feel like the mind is not developing as well because we don't understand what we need, how we need to live. Does that make sense to you?
Well, yeah, because as you described, ADHD and all the information and all the distractions and all that, it creates kind of a fragmented, like a distortion in a way. It's fragmented, it's watered down versus intense focus. It's just like common sense that would be a lot more powerful.
And then too, like if let's say you're experiencing watching violent stuff all the way. Gopi Krishna talked all the time how just watching it has as powerful effect as if it happened to you. And I don't think that's really realized. So if you kind of look at how we're living, maybe back and I'm not saying this was right, because I think everything's always right at the time it is, but oftentimes a family was reading a Bible or a spiritual thing together. Now we're all on our technology, and, and we're all racing around. I always say the world moves at 78 RPMs. Me, to stay healthy, need to move slower, and to hear God, I need to move slower, 33 RPMs. You kind of get in the world of this, the current of this competitive world, and it's just dragging everybody along.
Sure.
Along with the fact that it's turned into, you turn on the TV and it's always what the other side did wrong.
Yeah.
So you're always going, they did this. And
divided, division.
Divided. And then you don't have to work on yourself, and we have to get past the divided mind, but everything is fostering the exact opposite. So all I'm saying, that's what's going on. But if the word could get out that, geez, here's the next mind we're moving toward, here are the gifts that this mind would bring us. And you'd have a lot of people, I think, if they did any kind of research, and maybe they are, so many people would step forward and saying, well, I have this biology going on, I have these psychic they begin to say, well, how does this all tie together? Here's the gifts. How do we need to live then to make, if this evolutionary process is going on, we can't live the same way if we're moving to a higher mind. I think we're becoming, like, even our ideas of angels and gods and that kind of thing, is we're becoming mini gods eventually. I don't mean comparable to the intelligence, but so you have to develop those, those qualities and virtues of what you see in a higher, compassion, love, kindness, keeping the focus on yourself. And not only will it bring you more peace, and maybe your brain isn't ready for this next level of mind, but at a very minimum, you'll have a lot more peace and you'll be more closer to people. But I just feel like everything's working the other way right now. And it's like, if you're a celebrity, and I enjoy music and all that and sports, but it's kind of like, it's all about, now that guy's getting 100 million. Nothing wrong with him getting that, but it's kind of like, I actually found out, Irma, I was trying to get there, and I'm not saying I was mad. I got stopped, because if I got enough money, then I could do what I wanted. That's what I thought, but I got stopped, and now I go, thank you, God, for stopping me, because I would have never realized the place I'm in now is, you do have, it's humility is the law in this world, and we have this source of knowledge, which I call, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, right? We can tap into that, but it's a developmental process. It's not like, some people are farther along naturally. Maybe they're, the history of their family, was, let's say, good people, very smart, or just honest. They may in the beginning be farther ahead than other people, not good or bad. And so, but I'm saying, like, for me, yes, I had an interconnection in 1991, but I can tell you right now, it's 100 times deeper. But to get to that deeper connection, to really understand what is my voice versus this higher knowledge voice, I had to do a lot of purification work along with meditate.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. And so, let me change that. I'm going to say, when we evolve to the illumined mind, part of that process is to prepare the vessel. Preparing the vessel. I mean, we have to, it's like, if everything is energy, and I believe it is, we have to prepare ourselves to kind of hold that higher energy. Because if it did kind of come in all at once, maybe our physical vessel is not ready for that quite yet. I don't know.
Absolutely. Not only our physical, also our psychological or mental. If it came in all at once, that's like, I know you had these experiences as a young child, which were amazing. But I was interested when you told your story, and I heard some of it, and I thought, well, I wonder how she's developed all along, how that led her in her life. And I said, wow, she really has stayed. I know you've probably had a lot of ups and downs, but she stayed pretty grounded and seemed to keep progressing. And so a lot of people, when they have these experiences, they get a little carried away. And I got warned very early on. Now, they're very profound. You can have psychic paranormal experiences, but if you start to let them dominate you, then, it can even be inflate your ego.
You might stop at that point thinking, oh, this is
exactly, I've reached, but you really haven't, there's a higher goal. And when you stop at a shorter goal, when we're meant to go to a higher goal, it doesn't always work out as well. So, but on the other side, the physiological side, since this is a biological process, I've watched it I don't know what these secretions that are going up in my brain, but I can tell you they're coming from the reproductive area. And this was known in ancient India and other places that the reproductive system, where the most intense energy is, when Kundalini awakens, it's almost like the body now creates this energy from not just a narrow set of nerves, but from nerves all over the body. So it's creating a much more powerful energy, which is needed because a center in the brain opens up. Okay. And it needs to be fed by a more powerful energy. Okay. And it's an intelligent energy. And that's what really freaks people out. It's not something that you can control, but you have to, and this, frightens people. It's the whole idea of why they surrendered, why the religious people, they didn't know they were doing it this reason, but this is more intelligent and it's smarter than you and it can guide you. But if somebody's like, why I'm worried about people that meditate, if they fire this Kundalini, but they're living an unhealthy lifestyle, that can create mental problems. This was known in ancient times too, and it can create even psychosis. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
The biology is impure, so it taints the energy. And why I said in the beginning when it happened to me, it's almost like every experience I had proved Gopi's theory, because I can relate how if the process goes wrong, there can be mental illness. Now, I started with anxiety, but even after this awakening happened, I remember going and buying a glass of orange juice. I thought, well, this is 1994. Did somebody poison it? And I thought, boy, you were not thinking that. Okay, so that I was, and that was the only time it happened. But all these things, so it was like, that's why the purification work is so important, both for psychological and physiological reasons.
Well, do you think there's enough guidance for people that are on, I'll just say, a spiritual path to try and identify it, and are meditating and doing spiritual practices, spiritual discipline? Do you think there's enough guidance towards the power of that, and what happens if a person is doing that and they aren't ready for it and they have a Kundalini experience? I mean, who's going to be there to pick up the pieces?
I think there's more and more guidance out there, but I still don't think, because they really still don't understand the whole theory of it and the whole process and what it leads, the biological side. I still think a lot of the people that know about it, may not have all the answers, but they can definitely help. And I don't really know, to be honest with you, but my gut has always said that this needs to be more known so that we can start providing people wholesale guidance. I look at it like they still look at mental illness that's going on. And you hear all the time where the rates of mental illness are getting higher and higher. And it's almost looked at it at an individual level. I look at it like it's because we're living crazy and we don't understand the process that's going on in us, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why Gopi Krishna kept calling for experiments on the brain to prove this. And I don't think he ever could get it going. There was a lot of resistance. And I don't know if I don't know. But yes, I agree. And at times, I know for whatever reason, I wouldn't go to a psychiatrist because I just intuitively knew that. And actually, once I read a couple of my poetic verses, I used to go to this, we had a weekly meeting and it was with psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers. It was really a cool thing. But And one time I read some of my verses, and I had a really good friend who was a psychiatrist. He said, God, that is so brilliant. He goes, but if I didn't know you, I'd wonder about, like, you have mania or something, And I thought, well, even, so, and what happens is a lot of times, they go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist and they don't know anything about Kundalini, and they can get put on drugs or,
Yep.
And I'm not saying I'm not against drugs or anything, but I just wonder, it's kind of like, it's almost like we've created a society that's making everybody sick, and then we marvel at how we've learned how to treat the disease rather than we're really not getting to the core foundation of it. Do you follow what I mean by that?
Yes, I do. And I think all of that is true. So I had a question, and this is kind of going a little bit backwards, but I think it's a fairly important question. When you went through what you describe as the dark night of the soul, do you think that that's part of the process for people? Like, do you think going through a dark night of the soul is a necessary piece?
Oh, great question. I look at it like this. When intellect first developed, it probably took a long time where people were just born, and by age 3, their intellect began to form, but in the very beginning, it didn't. I think I look at it like the same kind of thing. The reason I put my story out there, I called it a rise, fall, and rise story. The rising was kind of like, becoming a BBA, MBA, CFA, CPA, all these different things, and getting married and traveling and having this, living in Marin County, and I'm going at age, 38. God, I got what, you're supposed to want. I'm not happy. What's going on? I feel like definitely had to have the dark night of the soul. And I was gradually shifting to the inner world more, okay, but I would write, I have one foot in one world, one foot in the other, one in the material one. I was in between them.
Yeah.
After the dark night of the soul, it's like I got kicked in the butt and says, you're going here, you don't have any choice. And what I looked at it like, Irma, was like, in a way, it cleans your mind out. I always said, like, it's like purifies your mind because it's going to allow new ideas, new ways of thinking. I always saw it like, I loved growing up in Wisconsin in the Midwest, but I left, to go to Southern California when I was 21 because it felt too confining, and, freedom was in California, and how I could think, and to be honest, there was like the beaches, the warm weather, and the California girls and the nightlife. That's where my, was at that time. And so that was drawing me, out to California, but it was like, it cleaned my mind out, and it was like, now you're starting with a blank slate. Now I can really work with you. You gradually left the collective. You started when you moved to California, then you left the corporation, then you left entrepreneurship, then you left. Then I went to, in 1998, I said that, I heard this inner voice, and I've also always been very grounded. So when I hear an inner voice, I'm not like, well, my inner voice said this, but it said, I want you to surrender fully, and you will experience an amazing inner life, but also an amazing outer life. Well, I used to always say to God, well, was the outer life ever going to happen? I've been on the edge financially for 23 years. Now, people aren't going to want to hear that, but the truth is it forced me to let go and keep surrendering, because I couldn't figure it out on my own. And in that surrendering process, little miracles would always happen to keep me going. 2 times I couldn't pay. And by the way, my ex-wife was working for the president of the United States, and I was like, didn't have money when we were together. I mean, back then we lived in the same city and good friends. I was like, I didn't have money to pay my rent. I thought everybody's going to think I'm nuts, but miracles would always happen. Somebody paid my rent twice out of nowhere. I paid everybody back eventually. But, and then so yes, that was necessary. I would say the ending of my story, at least on the financial side, was one year after making almost no money for whatever, well, some money, just barely, to live for 23 years, that and then all of a sudden the good Lord brought a financial deal to me. I executed. I made more money in 2020 than I had made the previous 24 years. I paid everybody off. But people would say, but yeah, you had to go through hell. No, no, no. In going through those years, I really surrendered. I was always taken care of. So what came out of that was I trusted this inner voice. Yes, it took me to the level, bare minimum of what or the absolute of what I could handle, but yet it always was there for me. When I jumped with some, off the cliff. Can you relate to this?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Not so much the dark night of the soul necessarily, although I did go through having to release what was not in alignment with the path that I started at 8 years old. I had to because I think it's part of the journey, because we are social beings. You want to belong and you want to fit in. So I think it's part of the journey to kind of take that route. And
I agree. When I listened to your thing, I thought, yeah, I can see you were started at a more advanced position, not better, but I say, when you had those experiences younger, and I thought, and then she didn't have to go through maybe, but I was wondering, I don't think you would have to go through as deep of a dark soul. In my case, I can see that, like, without getting divorced, and again, me and my ex-wife she's a wonderful person. We're really good friends, but I couldn't have done what I had to do. Honestly, I couldn't have been married. I didn't know that in the time, but I also saw it like, for men, a lot of men are suddenly like hitting the wall and don't understand why, so maybe in some ways it's more applicable to men. I don't know. Every story is different. I don't think people have to go, but also I had to go through the stages of my consciousness changing to be able to say now, well, I believe it's not only does a regular physiological change happen leading to this cosmic conscious mind, but also regular psychological change. So it almost had to happen that way for me to understand that. But also I wrote in my book how I just feel like, the 12-step programs will eventually, evolve into programs for developing higher consciousness and safe Kundalini awakening. So
yeah.
If I didn't get into a 12-step program, have the dark night soul and have that kind of like, again, I didn't know it. The program I was in was not for alcohol, but for people that are affected by alcohol. But just, it helped me survive the Kundalini. It wasn't why I got into it. It helped me surrender deeper. So it's almost like I had to go through all those experiences. So somebody else isn't being taught that. So, and like I said, eventually I think we'll born, and I didn't live as clean of a lifestyle as other, we were crazy when I was younger, growing up in Wisconsin. We drank a lot, we partied. So I think I had more purification work to do too.
So how is it for you present day with the awareness that you have and the journey that you're on, and the fact that possibly there's not a lot of people at this point yet that understand the extent of things the way you do? So what is your current day, your present day experience and your everyday functioning kind of?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. First of all, I've always stayed grounded. So I've also always been in the other world, and whenever I started to talk about this other world, I could just see people didn't, understand or want to hear it. I learned to, and then, but lately, because again, this is the first time where I feel like I can talk about it and get on podcasts. So I've been more focused lately on kind of reading even deeper related to Gopi Krishna so that it could prepare me to do these podcasts. It was almost like, Irma, like, okay, now I'll go out and get some podcasts and maybe something will happen related to research someday, but maybe not. I meant, maybe I'll do a couple of them and then I don't have to do it anymore. You follow me? Like, so in other words, it was like, but at the same time, I'm still involved in, like right now, trying to put a financial deal together to bring a couple companies together. So I operate in different worlds. Okay. And, I really thought that was important. One of the things I said in my book is I don't think you have to go into an ashram or a monastery. Not that any of these things aren't really good things. They're good, but a monastery or hermitage to reach higher consciousness. I want to prove that you can do it being a regular person, which I considered myself. I am a regular person. And day to day, I just have this one thing that happened to me and I see this other world, and that means like, because I feel like I have this connection, I'm always guided that my life just keeps getting better and better, but it's still hard at times.
Yeah.
But when I'm with people, some of my favorite people have been like George Washington Carver. Have you heard that name? He was just I always go and visit his national park in Diamond, Missouri. I don't think people are, he's kind of forgotten these days, but what a humble man. And Saint Therese, the little flower, they were all about love and doing the simple things in love. So I try to make my life as much about kind of being connected to higher power, asking for guidance, and serving and loving to the best I can. Sometimes I do it well, sometimes I don't. So that's the underlying foundation of my life. And to treat people well, to see the best in them. But first of all the work in the 12th step allowed me to do that to myself first. Like, in other words, I had to learn to love myself. I had to learn to accept myself, all of those things. So I had to start there, because when I was living on the outside more, which I totally appreciate, I loved how I lived. I did accomplish a lot, but I was still my foundation was built on sand. And so when that got all ripped from me, it was like, who am I if I'm not doing all these great things? So, you know what I'm saying? So, and I found the Al-Anon program, was like just so great for learning to take care of myself, keep the focus on myself, but also to not point the finger at you, and so like when something happens, it might be, God, that's 90% of that person acting out. But that other 10%, in this case, I can learn more about myself. So don't blame them. What 10% can you learn? So always have that attitude, which is the opposite, I think, of how the world works, how politics works, how nations work. And that's the shift we have to make. And that's does that resonate with you?
Yeah, that's a real important shift, because, obviously, as human beings, especially if you have not done inner work and you don't understand a lot of these things and have that kind of awareness, there's a lot of projection, a lot of projection, coming towards us. And to realize, yes, what is my 10%? Because that's what I can do something with and grow from. And then it does switch the focus from pointing outwards and blame to self-responsibility, inner growth, and what can I do to grow and expand my own self. And each person that does that, we become more and more powerful and more united, and we cooperate with each other instead of fighting against each other. So there's a lot of aspects, I think, to what you're describing as the illuminated mind. I don't know that we can skip any of the steps. I just don't think so.
I think we have to become like, some people are very fed up with institutional religions, but the underlying essence of what they were trying to teach us about, and I think everything is great. In other words, I think they played a really important role. Actually the 12 steps is more kind of my foundation, even though I was born Catholic, and I think a lot of the church, but I had grown and needed something a little bit different. And I always say, in the beginning, I lived life on the outside. I had low self-esteem, low self-confidence, but you wouldn't know it because I hid it and I tried to accomplish things. And I used to joke, when I was in the crib, I used to take that rattle and shake it, and I didn't even think I did that well. But in working on myself, I learned to look at myself in a whole different way. Now, it might sound like, you're self-absorbed, but it isn't. It's like, that's what allows me then to, all the frailties I have, other people have. So what I find over time is, I don't judge other people anymore. I say, well, they're hurting inside, or, whatever, if they're acting out. But also the projection can be positive. So like, and I
That's true.
Say, yeah, like if I like Gandhi, I don't say I'm Gandhi. I would say that somebody just said, have you done your podcast yet? Sorry, just distracted me for the minute. It's like I had the potential to have some element of what his truth represented. So I enamored with him, like, and honestly, his truth, his humility, Martin Luther King, his courage, his activism, his depth, his wisdom. And I can go through Lincoln. I just thought, what was it? Malice toward none, charity for all. Just those things. I had those potential. And so I would work on, so there was there's a balance between, okay, then when I'm acting out, I'm going, oh, okay, well, it's not them. It's like you're kind of doing it. But like I said, even if I'm pretty much pure in the thing, there's still something I can learn about myself. And I have found this, instead of asking other people to change, and I was taught this in the 12 step, as I change, it can have a ripple effect and other people can change. Not that you're doing it for that reason. You're not.
Yes, right.
So,
yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. So when you are involved in your everyday functioning, and then you are also doing these podcasts and talking about your book, Reaching Heaven on Earth, do you feel like you have to choose one or the other? Like,
I get it.
you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. Well, I start from a base of, I used to, for 20 years, I went to 5 meetings a week in the 12 steps, only because it was just making my life so much better. Now I probably go to 3. So I start from that. I have a daily practice I do. I think spiritual development isn't kind of a luxury to be practiced in our spare time. I feel like with the evolution of the brain and where we're going, that it's almost imperative that it's almost like brushing your teeth and washing yourself.
Yes.
There's a hygiene mentally that we need to incorporate. I don't want to ever tell anybody, everybody's different and whatever they need at a certain point, but I look at it like, so it always starts out of that spiritual foundation, staying connected to source. And I've proven over 25 years, this source guides me. It knows better than I do. Sometimes I make wrong decision. It acts like I call it my God pointing system, GPS system. It guides me. Sometimes I'm on the wrong, I make a mistake, I get whacked or friendly or sometimes not friendly to get back on the path. So that's the foundation. But it's the mixture. Like 2 days ago, I went to a meeting with a guy that owned a company and a guy who wants to buy a company. And it's like I just shift into that world. Now that's harder for me, because I knew when I talked to you today, it would be like, I don't get to talk like this when I'm talking so fast, probably. I never get to talk like this very often with people. And it's so liberating. When I'm in the other world, it's a little bit harder. It's kind of slow. It gives me a headache, but keeps me grounded. And so I do, but everything, I start my morning by praying. I make a list of things to do. Then the list just unfolds from my interior. Then the order I do things unfolds from my interior. So I may have 10 things I want to do. I may do 6 of them, but I may start with number 8 if that's where I'm directed. So I weave in and out of the worlds. One of my, and I'm not anything like this man, but I don't know if you've ever heard of Walter Russell.
No, but I heard you mention him in with the interview with Rick.
Yeah.
Well,
they always say that he lived 5 lives in one. He was he just all these different things. But what I learned from him was I kind of weave in and out of different things, and that variety is very good for me. In other words, like if I just stayed in spirituality, which I did for him, then I become lopsided that way and unbalanced, right?
That's true. And I would imagine in your, would it be correct to say business life with that?
Yeah.
So I would imagine in your business life that you bring all these spiritual aspects also into that, even though you aren't talking about it, you're still bringing it into there.
Totally. I mean, the financial deal I did in 2020, I mean, honestly, it was a very, very tough thing to do. And I wasn't like, I had done a lot of financial work, but not necessarily in this was selling a company. I didn't really have experience in doing that. And this was a big deal. And normally you have big firms that do this. I happen to know the people and they trusted me. But in the end, was important was how I dealt with the people and brought them together and worked through the issues. And I just knew enough about the financial issue, almost like troubleshoot on important issues. So yes, it's very much like you bring these skills in how you listen to people, and you get intuitions about, here's the next step. So I always say what I'm good at is what's the next step to do. Now, the people don't necessarily appreciate that because they don't realize there's that kind of a talent. That's like, so I don't say anything about it, but it's like, okay, I know the next step is to get a meeting between these two. Okay, after that meeting ends, then it's like, okay, what's the next step? Well, for some reason, I meant to talk to that guy and find out it's that sort of thing going back. But sometimes I feel kind of vulnerable, because I'm not quite, have all this, financial knowledge. But I had a friend the deal that I got on in 2020, who's more into this world or in this world, he said, Scott, you made me believe in God because I, first of all, know when you had no money, right? Now you're doing a deal. He said, I would have put the odds at 10,000 to 1 that you would have gotten that done. I mean that. He said, then the pandemic hit, which upped those odds to, and I just thought to myself, no, I knew it was going to get done. I don't mean that in a cocky way. I just knew I was called to do it and it would defy all odds. And in a way, maybe you can relate to this. I feel like my life has defied all odds by things that have happened because of following and getting in touch with this inner guidance,
Yeah, it's almost like, I did work, my main career was in corporate, and I did totally bring the spiritual aspects into my work, and it was like I had a superpower.
Totally.
Because things were so easy for me because I brought that spiritual aspect. So I could see things that other people couldn't see. And,
Yeah, I thought after I listened to your podcast, I thought, boy, she can see into people really clearly. I get that. Yeah, it's really a superpower. But sometimes when you're working for people, like in certain things where they expect you to have certain knowledge, which isn't nearly as important as this other stuff, but it always somehow has worked out.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point to make, the bringing of those two worlds together and the importance of that, because I do think a lot of times maybe the spiritual path does kind of, people kind of lean towards maybe like the life of Saint Francis and, giving up everything, which I lean in that direction as well. I really like simplicity. I just really, less is more to me. But I think it's really important for balance to understand when we do need to survive, this world does function, with money as part of the exchange and all of that. So
and it's important. That's why I would never, judge anybody, on where they're at or what they're doing. I would look at it this way. This whole thing is so choreographed in ways we can't even begin to understand. And hey, who knows? Maybe somebody, came in 100 lives later than you did. So they're at a certain, everybody is where they're supposed to be. So I learned to pretty much keep my fingers out of telling them ever what to do. I'm just saying in daily life, because it's like, I don't know what they need to go through. They may need to hit rock bottom and suffer some pain. Before I used to, God, I didn't like to see people in pain. I didn't like myself to be in pain. But once I realized my pain could also be transforming, well, and people will be okay. Let them, so.
And that's a big part to learn about life. I kind of call it staying in my own lane while also having love and compassion for others, without supporting them, without saving them. There's all kinds of ways that I look at that, but It's important to have a balanced perspective on things. So is there anything you want to share that you feel inspired to share at this moment?
Guys, I don't know. We kind of weave, I would maybe like to share. I'm a little bit thinking about this right now because we've covered so much, and maybe read a quick thing. I'd almost like to read two things, and I don't know. Is that okay? Or
Oh, absolutely. I just made that suggestion of the verse that stood out to me, but please read what you are inspired
I'd like
to
to read
read.
that too. So I don't want to read too much, but there was a couple things that I wanted to read what Gopi Krishna wrote related to what he saw the potential with Kundalini is, okay, what he sees the future world. The reason revelation is important, and he said it will always be important, that people somehow seeing into the future, just as they did in the past, like Christ and Buddha, and giving guidance, that that's going to be important forever. So, and he would always say, and I agree with him, that the intellect can't look into the future. So any kind of guess it's making about what the world's going to become is normally going to be wrong. But I think this is so uplifting. I want to read a couple uplifting things.
Yes,
the whole
absolutely.
journey is it's about hope and resurrection, I call it, and I do feel like there's a lot going on that's really kind of depressing, and I actually try to stay away from the news, but sometimes I get drawn in. But so here's what he wrote. He wrote, first of all, he spoke of the glorious future that awaits humanity. He said that despite the current wayward direction of our present civilization, a new world or heaven on earth is predestined to happen. So he shared the following in one of his books. Imagined in the context of the potentialities present in Kundalini, the vision of the future is so alluring, so full of beauty and majesty, so replete with astounding achievements and possibilities for the race that it's not possible to draw even a distant image of it. The earth is to become an abode of a graceful, highly intelligent, cosmic conscious race, wafted to another dimension of mind as a result of organic changes in the brain. It will be equally cognizant of both the worlds, the outer and the inner, or the material and the spiritual. It will be brought in touch with another level of creation, other intelligences and states of being pervading the universe. A universe now completely shut out from our sight because of the limited capacity of our brains. It is not some aliens from other planets, but we who will be the future enlightened denizens of the earth, just as we have been of the savage past. That's saying basically that we're going to be around in the future. Now, we may be on this earth, we may be in other planes of creation, but in other words, don't take this to mean that you're sitting there going, well, I'm never going to get there. That's the message he's trying to, I'll never get to a cosmic conscious or whatever illuminated mind, but everybody. And again, this is just his thing, but I think it's born out of a really deep truth. It goes on. The life of our distant progeny will be so full of charm and beauty, harmony and music, love and romance, adventure and exploit in space, again, both inner and outer space, wonders and marvels that no imaginative thinker has so far been able to frame a picture of it. They will have such an extended span of life, long-lasting youth and vigor, freedom from illness, want, and oppression, that this will be the kingdom of God, paradise, or nirvana, prophesied by the great seers and prophets of the past to be gained, not in a hypothetical heaven, but here on earth in the organic frame of man. It is the sublime state of beatitude that is promised in every holy scripture of mankind. Call it humankind. In this vision of the future, even the ideas of resurrection, liberation, and salvation will find fulfillment in a dramatic way. What we now experience or know of as clairvoyance, astral projection, telepathy, premonition, or prophecy are but faint glimpses of a future enormously extended state of consciousness. So that's kind of he actually had some more, but that's kind of like what, as he saw into the future. And I know people are probably saying, well, how are we going to get past this current thing? and how do we avoid a nuclear war? And I think somehow becoming aware that Kundalini, and that we have a divine destination, cosmic consciousness could help, but there's one other thing I wanted to read. Let me see if I can find it and try to remember, if you give me a second, where it might be. Thank you, God. I have all these papers, and it was a big jumbled mess, and I just pulled out the one. This was so, if I were a young person today, and if I were the parent of going to have kids, right now there's just so much, drugs and, alcohol, violence, all this stuff going on, and technology, which I think is a really good thing, but it's become a little bit unbalanced and it's hurting the minds. But I thought that we'll realize it's a means to an end, not an end in itself. But so here's what he wrote relating to children and youth. He said, in speaking of the possibilities of a higher state of consciousness positively influencing our youth, he wrote, the children on whom our future depends will be alive to the truth from an early age. They're talking about the truth of our destination to the cosmic conscious mind. The result can be electrifying. There is no influence and method of upbringing that can act so well in inculcating the desire for an ideal life in the plastic minds of children as the idea of a romantic adventure needing courage, devotion, honesty, truth, love, compassion, patience, and perseverance, of which the object is entry into a golden world of eternal life. And honestly, I know, I have experienced most of what he's saying in a very diluted fashion, but I don't have a doubt in my mind. It's not something I believe. I know, I used to have a terrible fear of death. I don't have any of that. I know that I'm eternal. And I hate to say that because it sounds so, I'm eternal. But I really think once you have an experience of this consciousness mind, again, which is different from a normal mind, and the material world becomes more like an image, which sounds weird, but when you're operating in it, it isn't. It's just so hopeful. And I know and I didn't start from a very good place. So if I get to some element of it, now that's why I wrote in my verses, it shows again in one lifetime, I always say it took 1 billion years to go from one cell to a human being. And now we can get a baby in 9 months, and now we can get an enlightened person next state of mind. I did want to read my poem. Would that be okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. And I'm going to read what you suggested. I can read. And I'll read just some of it. And then I will have said all my say. It was number 37 of 48. I wrote it on August 6, 2004, which was 59 years after the atomic bomb hit Hiroshima. I really believe the theory of Kundalini is the antidote to the nuclear bomb, eventually, not happening all at once. I know people are going to say, well, it can't happen, but...
Could you explain that just a little bit more?
Sure. Did you see the movie Oppenheimer that came out?
I have not seen it yet.
Okay, I don't want to ruin it for you, but it starts with a flash, of a mushroom cloud to show the atomic bomb, and now basically atomic energy has helped the human race a lot, but it's also put us at risk, and it's even scarier now because of what's going on. It just takes one thing, and who knows what could ignite it. So oftentimes when somebody has a Kundalini awakening, they have a flash of illumination, a bright light, okay? And their consciousness sees this bright light. So if you go back in history, Moses saw, the burning bush. And this isn't just Christianity. St. Paul on the road to Damascus, a bright light. Krishna talked about a bright light. Bill W., the founder of Al-Anon or AA, a bright light, and I'm forgetting another one. Oh, Dr. Buck, who wrote the book Cosmic Consciousness, A Bright Light. I said, well, isn't it interesting that in a way Kundalini starts, it's like almost trying to draw us attention to this idea that it's almost like can be the Kundalini process. If we're aware of really the target, the next step in evolution, if it really is true, which I would say, let's see if science can prove the biology of it. That's not going to people still have to prove this state of mind in their own experiences. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to shift everything, and again, it's not going to happen. But I think even talking about it in the beginning will, how just a tweak can change something. Okay.
Yep.
So let's say someday they say, oh, this is a possibility. And let's say in 15 years, 10 years, they start to say, wow, we can almost begin to prove there's some truth to that. And it could be sooner than that, or maybe it won't. I don't know. But I think it would immediately change the consciousness, just becoming aware of this possibility more in a wholesale way, and how it's really our consciousness that has declined that's causing, it's a malfunctioning evolutionary mechanism leading to a little bit of the deterioration of the brain, which is the underlying cause of what's going on. And as long as we keep pointing the finger at each other, we're never going to solve the problem. And there's only two ways. You're either going to, how do we change the thinking of humankind right now? What can change it? Well, a nuclear bomb can, or this can. So there's some element to where like this, I call it a positive asteroid instead of like the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs to allow mammals to come to the surface and flourish. In a way, I think this could be eventually an antidote because it brings so much hope. So
the power of the Kundalini awakening, the power of that, and visualizing nuclear bomb, the power and the light and the kind of explosion are kind of side by side and maybe equally as powerful.
They're not, and I think the power of Kundalini in the end, will show the true power of love. I mean, to me, even Gandhi talked about this. I wish I don't have the quote in front of me. He said it's the most subtle, but the strongest and most powerful force. And all the quotes that Gandhi and Martin Luther King, but people can't understand it. It's hard to, how can love when we got all this thing and a bomb can blow, how do you talk about love? But I think, the power of love, Kundalini, in order to get to this state of mind, we really have to act in a different way. We really have to do the work on ourselves. We really have to purify ourselves. We really have to learn to love and serve others. That power will totally transcend what a nuclear bomb can do. Okay, and I guess that's kind of the comparison. And I know it's a little bit, but you got to almost run with your intuition on this and understand.
Yeah, and that it's not something we can necessarily give to another, but what we can do is do our own work, walk that path, and be the change we want to see in the world.
I just so agree with that. Again, I went from step 1 to 12, and I wanted to tell everybody about the 12 steps. And I learned, you know what, keep your mouth shut. Nobody wants to hear it. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's kind of do the work on yourself and just model your life. That's what you can do. Now, I do think if they gathered case studies of people from all over the world, we'd find out that people are having all these different experiences, and they could relate, oh my gosh, the psychic experiences related to here in the Kundalini process, or the biology, or my eyesight change. And again, I know it'd be hard to differentiate what is related to that and this and that, but I just think they would find this is happening all over the people, and there's no really one kind of, I guess, explanation that brings all the pieces of the puzzle together. And that's still a little vague in my mind of how to explain it, but I just see it like they have brain research on neuroplasticity. Richard Davidson at Wisconsin, like if you meditate on compassion, you could develop that capacity. Well, it's not much further to say, hey, if you learn to model your life on love and compassion and purify yourself, that actually you can get into another dimension of mind, not just be compassionate. That's one element that will come out of that new mind. So, or they'll find how meditation and prayer, they're doing research on that, mindfulness, how that can change human beings. So, but that's part of what I call a bigger puzzle. And if they fit it into the Kundalini, those are important things to do to develop this new faculty of the mind.
Yep.
Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yep, total.
Okay. So wonderful to be able to say all this. So I wrote this. It was 59 years after the atomic. But not that I knew that, but I just happened to notice last night. Hey, isn't that the day the bomb hit? So I'll read just parts of it. It's fairly long, so please hold on to your seats and just remember that in college they gave me assignment to write a poem, and I could not write one line. And until this thing happened to me, all of a sudden, again, I didn't write it; would come through me. So, okay, there is joy in my heart from the deep recesses of my soul. Wells up a joy and happiness beyond belief. I have touched eternity. Eternity has kissed my soul. Drenched with love, my soul touches all parts of the universe. Matter dissipates, and all that remains is love. My heart speaks a great truth. God's immense love for humanity lights up the universe. The sky opens up, the material world dissolves. All that remains is my soul. I have touched a new dimension of being. I've been torn from my anchor in the material world. All that remains is consciousness. I am no longer anchored in my body. I float effortlessly, roaming the skies, touching all parts of the universe. I have become the universe. I am without dimension. I touch the sky. I roam the stars. I glow. I reach for the firmaments. I am happy beyond compare. I have seen the reality of my soul. I've been released from the bondage of flesh. I climb the stairway to heaven. I kiss the stars. I roam the amphitheater of my mind, the cathedral of my heart. My soul stretches forever, lighting up the sky, effervescent, glowing. My mind has transcended the limits of my body. I'm no longer confined in time and space. I'm eternal, formless. I stretch to infinity. All of me encompasses you. I sing with joy, dance with glee. I am the ether of the universe. Am I going too fast or too slow? No.
No, it's just fine.
The goal in life is to transcend the limit of our physical senses, where a whole new view of creation opens up. The lens of our mind is widened, a new window into our soul opened, our view expanded. We see with new eyes, the eyes of our soul. We are no longer a puny mortal encased in flesh, but are a jewel shining for eternity. The universe is in us. We stretch beyond the last limits of the universe. We have reached a wonderland, a fairyland of infinite proportion. It is our natural home. It is who we are. This is a little play off of Christianity, but we have been resurrected. We have left the tomb of our body. The Marys cry and they say goodbye. However, we're not gone. We are transformed to the farthest reaches of heaven here on earth. The stone is pulled back. Our spirits roam free. This is the purpose of human life, to leave the tomb of the body, to touch the ether, to roam the skies. We leave the cross, our shadowy forms, leaving the tether of our body. We are resurrected to new life. We assume our eternal form. We are a shining energy, a light unto the world. We are dazzling, radiant, white as snow, pure, formless, eternal, sparkling, brilliant, gleaming, streaming, effervescent. This is the good news, the glorious message which prophets, mystics, yogis, and saints of yore brought to humankind. Our consciousness lights up the world. It heralds a new religion. A universal religion that embraces all, that recognizes all as my brother and sister, all as my friend, all as my kin, all as myself. This is the mystery of our life. It is the mystery of our souls. It is the mystery of our eternal being. It is the light shown throughout history by the lives of our prophets, mystics, and saints, the past specimen of future evolved man and woman. We are not specks of matter, conceived by chance, brought to earth to live a flickering existence, soon to turn to dust, forever gone with no meaning, no truth, no continuity. These are fables of old. This is the old science. This new science of life recognizes our eternal being, the permanent nature of our souls. The world is forever born inside of us. We see new vistas of creation for eternity. This is the new science of which we are touching the frontier. It is both a science and religion. It is a universal religion embracing all of humankind. It heralds a new chapter in the life of humankind in the history of the world. We come face to face with a great truth, the eternal nature of our beings, the discovery of new energy, new planes of creation, and the intelligent forces of life. This is where the new science and religion begins. We are infants in our evolutionary development, destined to become supermen and women in the future, forever approaching the divine light, the source of our being. This is what keeps our hearts young and our hopes eternal, allowing us to withstand the rigors of life. Our glorious future destiny unfolding from the seeds of our souls deep within our hearts. Thank you for having the patience.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, when I read that, I thought, well, that is describing reaching heaven on earth.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm glad of course, I had 3 different ones. I wasn't sure. So when you suggested that, I thought, great, it's exactly what I need to do. So thank you again for letting me read that.
Well, thank you for reading it. And thank you for taking the time. I know this has been a rather long connection and podcast here, but I think it's well worth it. And I think there's been a lot of information shared within this time that's going to be very, very helpful to other people. So.
Well, I hope so. And I just thought to myself, I got to do a podcast and let you talk. I do feel like I talked a lot, but I knew once I got around you that things that I normally can't say would come gushing out. So I hope I didn't talk too fast or anything. It was really fun.
Yeah.
Enjoyable today.
Yeah, and thank you for writing the book and for sharing all of this that you are sharing, because I've known from a young age, I don't know how or why, but I've known from a young age that we can reach heaven on earth and that we are evolving towards that. And there's no doubt, I have no doubt about that.
I want to hear more of your story because it really interests me. Yes. And it's nice to have you on that wavelength.
Yeah. Thank you
I'm
so
sure there's
much.
a lot of other people listening who are on some portion of this wavelength.
Yeah, yeah. And I invite anybody on who wants to talk about these kinds of things and the possibility of evolving to reaching heaven on earth.
I think it's really good news. You don't have to have a near-death experience.
Nope.
You don't have to have a miraculous healing, but you do have to, and go on, all the other ways people have these things, which are wonderful. They give people a glimpse, but this is something that I think, it's a lot of hard work but it's a possibility that can be kind of, permanent, I guess.
Yeah, and it's not. I know I've listened to a lot of near-death experiences, and I know the experiences I've had throughout my life. I would call it the nearest to life that one can become.
I so want to hear more, Irma. I really do, because I can see it. Yeah, it really interests me.
Well, anytime, Scott, anytime.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
And thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you for letting me talk so much.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
All right. Bye, Scott.
Bye-bye, Irma.